When I left the monastery, the world outside felt louder than I remembered. The wind that once whispered through the bamboo groves now howled against the cliffs, and even the soft murmur of distant rivers seemed restless. I carried no possessions, only the robe that draped across my shoulders and the mala beads resting in my palm. Worn smooth by years of prayer, my teacher had told me, "Go where silence calls your name." I walked into the forest, into the unknown, and perhaps into myself. The forest floor was thick with fallen leaves, the scent of earth and moss rising like incense from the ground. Each step I took was careful, mindful, deliberate. I did not know where I was going, yet I felt guided by something unseen. Perhaps the quiet hand of destiny, perhaps the breath of the universe itself. The trees grew taller as I walked, their ancient trunks wrapped in vines, their branches arching above me like the ribs of a great temple. I felt small beneath them, a single breath in an infinite symphony of life. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time began to lose its edges. I walked until my thoughts began to fade, until the chatter of the mind, the endless parade of what-ifs and should-haves grew faint like distant thunder. When I reached a clearing, the world opened up. A small lake rested there, its surface perfectly still, mirroring the pale sky. I knelt beside it and cupped some water into my hands. It was cold, clear, alive. When I drank, it felt as if the forest itself was entering me, cleansing me from the inside out. I decided to stay there for the night. I gathered some dry twigs, but I did not light a fire. The night air was cool but kind, and the moon was enough to see by. I sat upon a flat stone by the lake's edge, crossed my legs, and breathed. The breath moved in and out like the tides of the ocean, and with each exhalation, I felt the weight of my old self slipping away. I could hear the distant call of an owl, the rhythmic pulse of crickets, and somewhere, the soft lapping of the water against the shore. Everything seemed to be breathing with me. As the night deepened, memories surfaced of the monastery, the chanting of monks at dawn, the fragrance of sandalwood rising in thin blue spirals. I remembered my teacher's eyes, old and filled with galaxies. Stillness is not the absence of movement, he once said. It is the dance of awareness with no partner. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. But sitting there in that forest, surrounded by a silence so vast it almost hummed, I began to see. I watched the moon reflected in the water. When the wind moved, its image trembled. When the air stilled, the moon returned to perfect clarity. That was me, I realized. The water was my mind, and the moon my true nature. It was never the moon that changed, only the ripples that distorted it. I smiled faintly. I had spent so many years chasing peace, not realizing it was there all along, waiting beneath the waves of thought. I don't know when I began to drift between waking and dreaming. The boundary grew thin. In the half-sleep of meditation, I felt a presence beside me, not threatening, not even human, just something ancient, familiar, like the spirit of the forest itself. I heard a voice, though it did not come from outside. It said, "You have carried your restlessness across lifetimes. Lay it down here." I felt tears slip down my face without sadness. There was no need to hold them back. They fell into the lake, tiny circles spreading outward until they disappeared into the vastness of still water. I whispered softly, I let go. The wind seemed to echo my words, rustling through the leaves like a gentle affirmation. Sleep came not as an escape, but as a return. I felt myself dissolving into the rhythm of the forest. My breath became the wind, my heartbeat, the pulse of the earth. I dreamed that I was a leaf, floating on the surface of the lake. Each ripple carried me somewhere deeper, not into distance, but into peace. When morning came, it arrived quietly. The first light filtered through the mist, turning every droplet of dew into a jewel. The air was cool and smelled of pine and life. I opened my eyes and realized I had not moved all night. Yet my body felt light, as if I had shed something heavy in the darkness. A small bird landed on a branch near me and began to sing. Its melody was simple, pure, unbothered by meaning. I watched it for a long time, smiling. I understood then that the bird sang not to be heard, but because song was its nature. Just as the river flows, the fire burns, and the stars shine, peace, too, must express itself. We do not need to search for it. We need only stop resisting its presence. I stayed by that lake for 3 days. I spoke to no one, though sometimes I whispered my thoughts to the wind, half hoping they might find their way to my teacher. I ate wild berries, drank from the stream, and watched the play of sunlight across the water. Each day, I felt less like a visitor and more like part of the forest itself. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, I noticed something glimmering beneath the water's surface. I leaned closer. It was a stone, smooth, round, and shining faintly. I reached in and lifted it from the water. It felt warm, though the lake was cold. Holding it, I sensed a subtle vibration, like a heartbeat. I knew it wasn't magic in the way people speak of miracles, but it was alive in some mysterious way. I placed the stone on the shore beside me and meditated once more. This time, when I closed my eyes, I saw within me an image of the same still lake. The same moon reflected, the same breath rising and falling. I understood. The outer world mirrors the inner. When the mind is disturbed, even paradise feels like a storm. But when the mind is calm, even the wilderness becomes home. That night, the stars came out one by one. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. I lay back on the ground and stared upward until my vision blurred and the heavens seemed to dissolve into my breath. I whispered to the universe, "I am listening." And for the first time, I truly heard the subtle hum beneath all existence, the quiet pulse of oneness. I realized then that stillness is not something to find, but something to remember. It is the space between heartbeats, the pause between breaths, the silence that holds every sound. It is what remains when we stop searching, stop striving, stop naming every cloud that drifts across our inner sky. When dawn came again, I stood by the water and bowed. The reflection bowed back. I thanked the trees, the wind, the lake, and whatever unseen wisdom had guided me here. I did not know where I would go next, but I no longer felt lost. Wherever I went, I would carry the stillness with me, the same stillness that lives beneath every thought, waiting patiently to be remembered. As I began to walk away, a gentle breeze rose behind me. The lake rippled once and then became calm again. I smiled, feeling the lesson settle deep in my bones. The path of stillness was not a destination, it was a way of walking, a way of being. The forest parted before me, light filtering through leaves like soft golden rain. Each step I took felt like a prayer. The world was still, yet alive, and in that balance, I found peace. The breath of the earth and my own breath became one rhythm, one silence, and as I walked deeper into the unknown, I realized that the journey had already ended the moment it began, because the stillness I sought was never somewhere else. It was here, in every heartbeat, in every moment, in the quiet awareness that says, "I am." When I left the lake behind, the forest path seemed brighter, as though the trees themselves were aware of what had awakened inside me. The morning light filtered through the canopy, painting the earth in gold and green. I walked without hurry, feeling the rhythm of my breath blending with the sound of nature. Every leaf that trembled, every beam of sunlight that flickered through the branches, felt like a message written in silence. I no longer searched for meaning in things. I allowed meaning to unfold by itself. By midday, I reached a valley where the forest opened into a field of tall grass. A stream meandered through it, slow and serene, its surface glinting under the sun. I followed it downstream until I saw a small hut built of wood and stone resting at the foot of a hill. Smoke rose gently from its chimney, carrying the scent of herbs and burning pine. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should approach. But the door opened before I could decide. An old monk stepped out, his head shaven, his robe faded to the color of ash. He smiled when he saw me, a knowing smile, as if he had been expecting me for a long time. "You've come far," he said softly. "I have," I replied, bowing. "I seek only rest." "Then you shall have it," he said. "But rest is not found by lying still. It blooms from understanding." He motioned for me to follow him inside. The hut was simple bare walls, a low wooden table, a mat made of reeds, and a clay bowl filled with water. In one corner stood a single lotus flower, its stem resting in a small pot of muddy water. Its white petals glowed faintly, pure and perfect. The contrast between the delicate bloom and the murky water it rose from struck me deeply. The old monk noticed my gaze and said, "Beautiful, isn't it?" "Yes," I whispered, "but I wonder how something so pure grows from such darkness." That is the lesson most people miss. Sit, and I will tell you what the lotus has been whispering for 1,000 years. We sat across from each other on the floor. The air smelled of smoke and rain. I could hear the faint sound of water trickling outside, the breathing of the earth itself. The monk closed his eyes for a moment before he began to speak. "Long ago," he said, "before time wore a name, there was a pond deep in the mountains, hidden from all eyes. Its waters were thick with mud and decay, for leaves had fallen there for centuries. In that darkness lived countless seeds, sleeping, forgotten. Among them was a single lotus seed. It felt the weight of the mud pressing down on it and longed for light, though it had never seen it. Seasons came and went. Rain fell, storms raged, yet the seed remained buried, dreaming of a sun it did not know. One day, it felt a stirring within a small pulse of life, an urge to rise. It pushed upward through the cold, sticky layers, inch by inch, struggling toward something unseen. Every time it reached a new layer, the mud grew heavier, the journey harder. But the seed never gave up. And then, one morning, it broke through the final veil of darkness and touched the surface. The first breath of air kissed its skin. Light soft, golden, infinite filled its being, and in that moment it blossomed. The mud no longer mattered. It had been both prison and womb. Without the mud, there could be no lotus. Without the struggle, there could be no beauty. The monk's voice faded into silence. I stared at the lotus on the table, its petals trembling slightly in the breeze from the window. I thought of my own pathed doubts, the mistakes, the grief I had carried for years. I had always cursed my suffering, seeing it as a burden to escape. But now, something shifted inside me. Perhaps the mud I had tried so hard to wash away was the very thing that had shaped me. The monk rose and poured water into 2 small cups. The steam curled between us like a spirit. "Taste this," he said. I took a sip. The tea was bitter, but beneath the bitterness there was warmth, depth, and an aftertaste of sweetness. He nodded. The bitterness teaches the tongue to recognize sweetness, just as pain teaches the soul to recognize peace. I closed my eyes and felt the warmth spread through me. The world seemed to slow. I could hear my heartbeat echoing in the small room, each pulse reminding me that I was alive. "Why do we fear suffering?" I asked. "Why do we run from the mud?" The monk smiled gently. "Because we forget what it gives us. We mistake the pain for punishment, but it is a teacher. The lotus never curses the mud, it honors it. You must learn to do the same. When life feels heavy, bow to it. When sorrow comes, listen to it. Every shadow is cast by light." His words sank into me like rain into thirsty soil. Outside, the sound of the stream grew louder, as if the water itself was echoing his truth. I felt my eyes grow heavy, not from weariness, but from a deep stillness spreading through my body. The monk noticed and said, "Rest here tonight. The forest will watch over you." That evening, after we shared a bowl of rice and silence, I sat outside the hut under a sky painted with stars. The lotus in the window glowed softly, its petals half closed. Fireflies drifted above the grass like tiny lanterns. I breathed in the night, the cool air, the smell of earth, the rhythm of the stream. My mind felt like a calm pond, and every thought that rose was just another ripple, fading into peace as I drifted towards sleep. I thought again of the seed pushing through the mud. I imagined my own heart as that seed, still climbing, still learning, still yearning for the light. Perhaps enlightenment was not a single moment of awakening, but a constant blooming petal, breath by breath. In my dreams, I stood once more at the edge of that hidden pond. The water shimmered beneath a silver moon, and countless lotus flowers floated upon its surface. Each one glowed from within, as if a star had taken root in the mud. I heard a whisper among them, "We are born of darkness to remind the world that light never leaves." I woke before dawn. The old monk was already outside, sweeping the path. He smiled when he saw me. "You heard them, didn't you?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, they said the light never leaves." He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Then you have understood. The lotus has shared its truth with you. Now carry it wherever you go." He handed me the same stone bowl that had held the lotus. Inside it was a single new seed, small and unassuming. "Plant this when you find your next resting place," he said. "Let it remind you that purity is not freedom from the world, but harmony with it. I bowed deeply, gratitude welling up inside me. I did not know when I would see him again, or if I ever would. But something told me our paths had met exactly when they needed to. When I left the hut, the sun was rising behind the hills. The sky blazed with pink and gold, and mist floated over the stream like drifting silk. I held the small seed in my palm, feeling its quiet pulse of life. As I walked, I imagined the mud, the struggle, the light, and how all of it was one great unfolding. The forest welcomed me back. Every sound seemed gentler now, every step lighter. I no longer saw the mud beneath my feet as dirt to avoid, but as the sacred ground from which understanding grows. I realized that my teacher had sent me into the world not to escape suffering, but to learn how to see its hidden beauty. That day, I came upon a pool of still water, surrounded by reeds. I knelt and pressed the seed into the soil near the edge, covering it softly with my fingers. "Grow," I whispered, "and may those who see you remember what you have taught me." The wind answered with a sigh, and ripples spread across the water. I sat there for a long time, watching the reflection of the sky. The clouds drifted slowly, their shapes dissolving into one another, never holding on to form. I understood then that peace is not something permanent, is a living thing, like the lotus, always blooming and fading, blooming again. It does not demand perfection, only presence. When the sun climbed high and the cicadas began to sing, I rose to continue my journey. My heart felt clear, open, like a window through which light could finally enter. I no longer feared where the path would lead, for I carried within me both the mud and the flower, both the storm and the stillness. As I walked, I looked up at the vast blue sky and whispered a silent vow. I will walk this earth gently. I will honor both the darkness and the dawn. And when I forget, may the lotus remind me that beauty is born from the deepest places. The wind carried my words away, and I smiled, knowing they would return to me one day in another form, perhaps as rain, perhaps as a whisper in someone else's dream. The day I found the river, the wind had been whispering all morning. It spoke through the tall reeds, through the trees that swayed like slow dancers, through the soft hum of unseen insects. The world seemed to be guiding me toward something inevitable. I followed the sound, and soon the forest opened, revealing a valley where sunlight spilled freely. At its center flowed a river so wide and gentle that at first glance it looked like a moving mirror, carrying the sky within it. The current was calm but alive, shimmering with threads of silver. Pebbles beneath the water looked like stars scattered across the floor of the heavens. I stood at the bank, listening. The river's voice was unlike any I had ever heard. Steady, patient, eternal. It spoke without words, yet I understood every syllable. It said, "Come and remember what it means to let go." I dropped my small bundle beside a large rock and knelt at the edge. When I cupped the water in my hands, it slipped through my fingers effortlessly, gliding back into the flow. I tried again, but no matter how tightly I held it, the water escaped, returning home to itself. And in that simple motion, the river had already begun to teach me. For a long while, I just watched. Fallen leaves floated by yellow, red-brown each, carried gracefully by the current, unresisting. They turned and spun, sometimes caught in eddies, sometimes drawn beneath the surface, yet none of them fought. I wondered what it would feel like to surrender that completely, to trust the current, even when I could not see where it led. The sun was warm. The air filled with the scent of wet earth and wildflowers. I sat on the bank, crossing my legs, and closed my eyes. The river's rhythm became my breath, the inhale, the exhale, the endless rising and falling. With each breath, something inside me began to loosen the tightness of old regrets, the echoes of memories I had carried too long in the stillness behind my closed eyes. Faces appeared, people I had known, loved, and lost. Some smiled, some wept, some turned away. I felt again the sting of betrayal, the ache of loneliness, the weight of things unsaid. The river whispered, "Let them go," but my heart resisted. Letting go, I realized, is not forgetting. It is forgiving the part of yourself that cannot forget. I opened my eyes and saw a figure on the opposite bank, an old woman draped in saffron robes, her face serene and radiant like a full moon. She was tending to a small fire, boiling something in a pot. When she noticed me, she raised her hand in greeting. I returned the gesture. Without speaking, she pointed downstream, as if inviting me to follow the river's path. I bowed, unsure if she was real or part of the river's vision, and began to walk along the bank. The water flowed beside me like an old companion. Sometimes it widened into calm pools. Sometimes it narrowed into rushing channels that sparkled like liquid glass. I saw fish darting beneath the surface, dragonflies hovering above, and once, a white heron standing motionless in the shallows. Everything moved, yet nothing was lost. After walking for some time, I came to a bend where the current slowed and deepened. There, the old woman sat on a smooth stone, waiting. Her eyes were closed, her hands resting in her lap. I approached quietly and bowed. "You heard the river," she said, without opening her eyes. Her voice was like wind through bamboo, soft but unshakable. "I did," I replied. It told me to let go. And what do you hold that weighs so heavily? She asked. I hesitated. So many answers rose within me. My past, my guilt, my longing for those who had gone before me, the fear of being forgotten, the pain of failing my teacher's expectations, the burden of wanting to be good, pure, enlightened. All of it clung to me like wet garments. I hold everything, I said, finally, and it is too much. The woman smiled faintly. Then you are ready. She stood and motioned for me to follow. We walked down to where the water met a bed of smooth stones. The current brushed against our ankles like silk. Do you see this river? She asked. It does not grasp the rain that feeds it, nor does it chase the ocean that awaits it. It moves because that is its nature, to flow, to hold nothing, to lose nothing. She bent down, scooped up a handful of water, and let it fall back again. We suffer because we wish to hold the water still. But water that does not move becomes stagnant. So too does the heart. Her words rippled through me. I watched the river and felt something breaking open inside. How do I begin? I asked quietly. She looked at me for a long moment. By naming what you cling to and offering it to the current. I closed my eyes again and began to name them softly, one by one. I let go of the fear that I am not enough. I let go of the memory of words I cannot take back. I let go of the faces that visit me in dreams and vanish by dawn. I let go of the guilt that hides behind my silence. I let go of the need to be free of pain. Each time I spoke, the wind seemed to lift a little of the weight from my chest. I felt tears on my cheeks, but they were not bitter. They were warm, clean like the first drops of rain after a long drought. The old woman began to hum softly, a tune so ancient it felt like it had no beginning. The sound blended with a river's voice until I could no longer tell them apart. She reached into a pouch and drew out a single leaf. Place this in the water, she said. It will carry your burdens farther than your feet ever could. I took the leaf and held it against my heart. Then I placed it gently on the surface of the river. It floated for a moment, then began to drift away, turning slowly with the current. I watched it until it disappeared beyond a bend. When it was gone, I realized I was smiling. My chest felt lighter, as if I had been carrying a heavy stone and only now remembered how to breathe. The old woman looked at me, her eyes glimmering like the reflection of the sun on the water. You see, she said, letting go is not losing. It is making space for what wishes to stay. I bowed deeply. Who are you? I asked. She smiled, and for a moment, I thought I saw the same calmness in her gaze that I had seen in my teachers. I am no one, she said. I am the part of you that remembers how to flow. Before I could speak again, a breeze passed between us, carrying the scent of river lilies. When I opened my eyes, she was gone. Only her footprints remained on the stones, already fading beneath the ripples. I sat there long after she disappeared. The river moved steadily, endless in its patience. I felt the urge to stay forever, to dissolve into its music, but I knew that even this peace was something I must not cling to. The lesson was clear. Even serenity, when held too tightly, becomes another chain. As the afternoon waned, I walked into the water until it reached my knees. The current wrapped around me like an embrace. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Thank you." Then I closed my eyes and submerged my hands, feeling the water rush between my fingers. For a moment, it felt as though the river was moving through me rather than around me, cleansing every hidden corner of my being. When I emerged, the sun was dipping low, painting the water with strokes of gold and amber. Birds were returning to their nests, and the air was filled with the soft hum of dusk. I gathered my bundle and followed the river downstream, not because I knew where it would lead, but because I trusted its direction more than my own thought. As I walked, I realized that life itself was this river, always moving, always changing. People come and go like waves. Moments rise and fall like the tides. Trying to hold on to them only leaves you with empty hands and a heart full of longing. But if you learn to let them pass, you discover that nothing is ever truly lost. Everything that leaves returns in another forms, sometimes as wind, sometimes as light, sometimes as peace. That night, I made camp beneath an old willow tree by the water's edge. The moon rose, full and luminous, reflected perfectly on the river's surface. I sat watching its reflection tremble gently with each ripple, remembering what I had learned by the lake. It is not the moon that moves, but the water. Stillness and movement are one. I breathed deeply, letting the cool night air fill my lungs. With each breath, I imagined the river flowing through me, carrying away remnants of anger, sorrow, and fear, leaving behind only quiet gratitude. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the soft cry of an owl, a sound that felt ancient and wise. As I lay back and closed my eyes, sleep began to drift over me like mist. I dreamed I was floating down the river, weightless. The stars above were my companions, and the current cradled me like a child. I heard again the voice of the woman, gentle and vast. When you stop grasping at the shore, you will find the river has been carrying you home all along. When I awoke at dawn, the world was washed in pale gold. The river was calm, whispering softly to itself. I watched a single leaf float past, the same kind of leaf I had released the day before, and smiled, wondering if it carried someone else's burdens now. Perhaps the river did this for everyone, silently taking what we could no longer hold. I stood, bowed to the water, and felt the wind brush against my face. I knew the lesson of the river would stay with me forever. That release is the purest form of love. To let go is not to abandon. It is to trust the flow of life, to believe that every ending is simply the beginning of another current. I turned away from the river and began walking again, lighter than I had been in years. Behind me, the water continued its endless journey, singing its soft, eternal song. I carried its melody in my heart as I walked toward the horizon, where the earth met the sky in one unbroken line. The path stretched ahead, shimmering in the morning light, and I understood, at last, that the river of letting go flows through all things, through time, through sorrow, through the heart itself. And when we finally learn to move with it, we do not lose ourselves. We become it. The morning after I left the river, the air was filled with a golden mist that made the world seem half dream, half reality. The path wound upward through low hills covered with soft grass that shimmered like silk in the sunlight. I walked without hurry, my bare feet pressing into the damp earth, feeling the heartbeat of the world beneath me. The river's voice still echoed in my mind, a quiet reminder to move with life rather than against it. Each step felt lighter, freer, as though I were being carried forward by something unseen. By midday, the hills gave way to rocky ground. The wind grew cooler and sharper, carrying the scent of pine and ancient stone. In the distance, rising like a mirage above the mist, I saw the outline of a temple built into the side of a mountain. Its walls gleamed faintly, catching the sunlight in strange patterns. Something about it called to me, the way a forgotten melody pulls at the edges of memory. I felt that I had been there before, not in this lifetime, perhaps, but somewhere in the deep memory of the soul. The path leading to the temple was steep and narrow. Loose stones rolled beneath my feet, and the air thinned as I climbed. Each breath became a prayer. When I finally reached the gates, I found them open. They were carved from dark wood, weathered and cracked, yet still strong. On their surface were symbols I could not read, ancient characters, spirals, and images of lotus flowers blooming from flames. I stepped through, and the world grew still. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of old incense. Dust motes floated through beams of light like tiny galaxies. The floor was smooth stone, worn by countless footsteps that had passed before me. At the center of the vast hall stood a single statue of the Buddha, carved from translucent crystal. Light entered through an opening in the ceiling, striking the statue so that it seemed to glow from within. The face was calm, neither smiling nor stern, simply awake. I bowed deeply. As my forehead touched the cold stone, I felt a pulse beneath my palms, though the temple itself were alive, breathing. When I stood again, the sound of my breath echoed through the hall. I walked slowly toward the statue and sat at its base. The moment I closed my eyes, the silence wrapped around me like a cloak. For a while, nothing happened. Then, gradually, I became aware of a faint vibration in the air, a hum so soft it could have been my own heartbeat. It grew stronger, not louder, but deeper, resonating inside my chest. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I tried to identify it, but it dissolved whenever I reached for it. It wasn't a sound that could be heard. It was a presence that could be felt. In that vibration, my thoughts began to slow. The stream of images and memories that usually crowded my mind softened, like leaves settling at the bottom of a pond. In their place came light, gentle at first, like dawn behind closed eyes. It spread slowly, illuminating everything inside me. It wasn't a light that came from outside. It rose from within, glowing behind my ribs, behind my breath. I don't know how long I sat there. Time lost its edges. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was simply existing, aware of breath, aware of heartbeat, aware of stillness that wasn't empty but full. The light within me grew brighter until it felt as though I could see even with my eyes closed. And then, in that vast inner space, I saw something. A small child sitting by a river, playing with stones. The child looked up, and I realized it was me, or rather, reflection of who I had once been, innocent, unburdened, untouched by the weight of the world. The child smiled and said, "Why did you leave?" I tried to answer, but no words came. "You thought you needed to find something," the child continued, "but you were already it. You wandered so far from yourself that you forgot your own light." Tears filled my eyes. I wanted to reach out, to embrace that small reflection of my soul, but the vision began to dissolve into radiant white. I felt warmth spreading through me, not from outside, but from the core of my being. It was as though the temple, the statue, and I were all made of the same light. The walls seemed to disappear, and I was sitting in the center of an infinite expanse, surrounded by a soft radiance that had no source and no end. A voice rose from that light, not male or female, not human or divine, but something vaster. It said, "You are not separate from what you seek. The light you worship has always been within you. You need only remember." The moment the words touched me, I felt my body dissolve into pure awareness. There was no distinction between me and the air, between the sound and the silence. It was all one, everything breathing together, moving together, shining together. I was the wind through the trees, the flame in the candle, the river flowing through the mountains. I was the watcher and the watched, the question and the answer. I don't know how long I remained in that state. It could have been a breath or an eternity. When I returned to myself, the light faded gently, like a candle burning down. I opened my eyes and saw that the temple had changed. Or perhaps it was I who had changed. The walls that once seemed dark now shimmered with a faint glow. The statue before me appeared alive, its eyes gleaming softly as though aware of my awakening. I rose to my feet and bowed again, gratitude flooding through me. I felt lighter than air, as if every burden I had ever carried had melted away into that sacred stillness. The hum that had filled the air was still there, though quieter now, as if reminding me that the light never truly leaves, only waits behind the noise. I walked deeper into the temple, passing through narrow corridors lined with small lamps. Some flickered, some burned steady. In one chamber, I found a pool of water so still that it perfectly reflected the ceiling above. When I looked into it, I didn't see my face. I saw stars, galaxies, worlds turning slowly in endless silence. And then I realized they were not out there in the sky. They were within me. I touched the surface of the water, and ripples spread outward, distorting the reflection. The stars wavered and merged, yet even in their movement, they never disappeared. In that simple motion, the temple whispered another truth. Even when clarity is disturbed, the light beneath remains unchanged. I sat beside the pool for a while, tracing my fingers over the stone floor. It was warm beneath my touch, as if the mountain itself carried a living heart. The air shimmered faintly, and for a moment, I thought I heard the soft chanting of unseen monks' voices carried through time, echoing across lifetimes. Their song wasn't in any language I knew, yet I understood it perfectly. It said, "All things return to light." Before leaving, I approached the statue one last time. At its base, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: small lotus carved into the stone, its petals cradling a single drop of water that glowed like a gem. I bent closer. The droplet trembled but did not fall. I reached out, and the moment my fingertip touched it, the drop dissolved into a pulse of warmth that traveled through my arm and into my chest. The light within me flared again, brief but brilliant, like the memory of the sun in a storm. I understood then that the temple was not built from stone, and Woodwit was built from awareness. Every wall, every beam, every shimmer of dust was a reflection of the inner sanctuary we all carry. The temple of inner light was never a place I had come to. It was something I had finally opened within myself. When I stepped back outside, the world was drenched in light. The mist had lifted, revealing mountains that stretched endlessly, their peaks dusted with snow. The sky was so blue, it looked like eternity itself. The air was cold, crisp, alive. I stood at the temple's threshold for a long time, breathing it in, feeling as though the mountain and I were exchanging our breaths. As I began my descent, I turned once more to look at the temple. Sunlight struck its crystal walls, and for a heartbeat, it seemed to glow from within, just as I now did. I smiled, whispering a quiet thank you to whatever power had guided me there. The path downward was long, but I did not tire. Each step felt guided by a rhythm deeper than will, the same rhythm that moves rivers and stars. I thought of all the teachings I had received along my journey, the still lake, the lotus rising from the mud, the river that taught release, and realized they were all threads of the same tapestry, leading here to this light dot. By the time I reached the foot of the mountain, dusk had fallen. The horizon burned with shades of amber and rose. I sat upon a rock, watching as the first stars emerged. The sky darkened slowly, like the world drawing in a deep breath before sleep. I felt the faint pulse of the light still glowing within my chest. It wasn't dazzling or grand, just steady, warm, real dot as night settled around me. I whispered into the silence, the temple is within me. The light never leaves. The wind carried my words upward, and I imagined them echoing through the mountain halls, joining the eternal hum that had once surrounded me. I closed my eyes and rested, no longer searching for peace, no longer afraid of darkness. The world breathed in rhythm with me, and for the first time, I understood that illumination is not the absence of shadow, but the gentle presence that lives within it. The light I had found in the temple was not something new, was the same light that had been guiding me from the beginning, waiting patiently to be seen. And as I drifted into sleep beneath the stars, the stillness of the mountain cradled me like a mother holds her child. I dreamed of a temple made of pure light, not built by hands, but by love itself. I walked through its open gates, knowing that wherever I went next, that temple would walk with me, quiet, eternal, and full of peace. The night after I descended from the mountain, the world seemed quieter than I had ever known it. Even the wind moved softly, as though careful not to disturb the silence that had settled within me. I found a small clearing by the foot of the hill, where a few wildflowers swayed under the moonlight. There, I built a small fire and sat beside it, watching the flames rise and fall like the rhythm of my breath. The stars above were bright and patient, scattered across the heavens like the thoughts of a sleeping god. For the first time in my wandering, I did not feel the need to go anywhere. The temple's light was still within me, steady, unwavering. Every breath carried its echo. I had once searched for peace, as though it were a place I could find, a hidden sanctuary behind some distant horizon. But now I understood that peace was not a destination. It was the quiet recognition that there is nowhere else to be. I sat for a long time, simply breathing. The fire crackled softly. Crickets sang from the grass. In the distance, I heard the faint rush of the river I had crossed days before. The same river that had taught me to let go now seemed to be whispering its gratitude, as though we were old friends meeting again in silence. The sound blended with my heartbeat until I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. When the flames finally burned down to embers, I lay on my back and gazed at the night sky. The stars seemed closer now, as if they had drawn nearer to listen. I could feel the vastness of the universe breathing around me, and yet I felt no smallness in it. There was no separation between myself and the infinite Noli, the soft awareness that everything moved as one great tide of light. Somewhere deep inside, a voice rose not with words, but with understanding. All that exists is peace. All that breathes is love. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself dreaming not of places or faces, but of light. It spread across everything like dawn over still water. Within that light, I walked once more, barefoot and weightless, through a vast field of golden grass. The air shimmered with warmth. Ahead of me stood a figure, the same old monk I had met by the lotus pond. Though his form seemed made entirely of radiance, he smiled when he saw me. "You have traveled far," he said, though his voice was softer than the wind. "And what have you found?" I thought about his question, and for the first time, my answer came not from thought, but from the stillness of my heart. "Nothing that I did not already carry," I said. "Only the courage to open my eyes." The monk nodded, his eyes shining with that same knowing kindness. "The path was never about seeking," he said. "It was about remembering. Peace cannot be found because it was never lost." As he spoke, the field began to dissolve into waves of light, and I felt myself becoming part of it, each cell, each breath merging into the golden radiance. I could hear countless voices, soft as rain, chanting in harmony. It was not a song of worship, but of recognition, as if every being in existence were whispering the same simple truth. We are one. We have always been one. When I awoke, dawn was breaking. The first light of morning spilled across the land like a gentle hand, painting everything in hues of rose and amber. The air was cool and damp with dew. A bird sang from a nearby tree, its voice pure and unafraid. I sat up slowly, feeling the earth beneath me alive, breathing, awake. For a while, I just watched the sunrise. Each moment of color seemed to carry a secret, that every beginning is simply a continuation of what has always been. The mountains stood silent and golden in the distance, their peaks glowing like the crowns of ancient guardians. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of the sun touch my face. It felt like the temple's light had followed me into the world, no longer confined to walls or statues. It was everywhere, within the air, within the soil, within the pulse of my own body. I rose and began to walk again, though this time I had no destination. My steps were lighter than before, as if gravity itself had grown kind. Each sound I heard, the wind through the grass, the buzzing of insects, the murmur of distant water, was part of a single, endless song. I realized then that enlightenment was not an event, but a way of hearing the world differently, a way of being fully present in every note. As I walked, I met a small child sitting beside the path, playing with stones, much like the child I had seen in my vision at the temple. He looked up at me with curious eyes and asked, "Where are you going?" I smiled. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe nowhere." He laughed, and the sound of it was like a bell. "Then you are already there," he said, and went back to arranging his stones in a circle. His laughter lingered in the air, long after I had walked on, weaving itself into the wind. Hours passed, though I barely felt their weight. The sun climbed higher, and I came upon a quiet lake surrounded by willow trees. The surface of the water was so calm that it mirrored the sky perfectly. I knelt beside it and looked at my reflection. For a moment, I saw the same traveler who had once wandered through dust and doubt, searching for meaning in distant places. But then, as I gazed deeper, the reflection shimmered and changed. I saw the temple, again the crystal Buddha, the pool of stars, the inner light that had never dimmed. And suddenly, I understood. The temple had never been behind me. It had been following me all along, reflected in every act of kindness, every breath of gratitude, every quiet moment of awareness. I smiled and whispered a silent prayer, not for guidance, but in thanks for the journey, for the lessons, for the stillness that had taught me how to see. A gentle breeze rippled across the lake, breaking my reflection into waves of light. The sight made me laugh softly. It was beautiful in its impermanence. Even broken, it was whole. I dipped my hand into the cool water and watched the ripples travel outward, widening until they disappeared. That small motion felt like a blessing, a reminder that even the smallest touch leaves a pattern upon the world as the day drifted on. I lay beneath the willow trees and closed my eyes. The leaves rustled above me, whispering secrets to the wind. I felt the soft earth beneath my palms, grounding me in the simple miracle of being alive. My breath moved easily, without effort, like the tide returning home. A deep peace settled over me, so complete that I could feel my heart beating in harmony with everything around me: the trees, the water, the sky. In that peace, I sensed the presence of every person I had met on my journey. The old monk, the child, even the river itself. They were all within me now, not as memories, but as living parts of my being. It was then I realized that awakening is not an arrival, is an unfolding. It is the endless blossoming of awareness that continues long after one believes the journey is complete. Every breath is a new beginning. Every heartbeat is another chance to love. The light within me pulsed softly, steady as ever. It no longer flared with revelation, for it no longer needed to. It was simply there, constant, quiet, eternal. I smiled, feeling the warmth spread through my body like sunlight through leaves. When night came again, I watched the stars emerge one by one. They did not seem distant anymore. Each one felt like an old friend, a spark of the same infinite light that lived within me. I whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for everything," and the night seemed to whisper back, "You were never alone." I lay there for a long time, letting the sounds of the world lull me into stillness: the rustle of grass, the soft rhythm of my breath, the low hum of existence. My eyes grew heavy, and I felt sleep approach, gentle and kind. As I drifted into dreams, I saw once more the river, the lotus, the temple, and the boundless field of light. They were no longer separate places, but one seamless landscape within my heart. I walked through it, weightless, surrounded by a silence that was not empty, but alive. I knew then that I had come full circle, not back to where I began, but back to who I had always been. And in that sacred stillness, I finally understood peace is not found by escaping the world, but by awakening to the truth that the world itself is sacred. The earth, the sky, the breath, the heartall are threads of the same divine fabric. To live is to bow before that mystery with every breath. As the last thought faded, I felt myself dissolve into that endless quiet, not losing myself, but becoming everything: light, sound, stillness, peace. There was no end, no beginning, only the infinite breathing softly through me. And there, in that luminous silence, I slept, cradled by the universe, embraced by the same gentle truth that had followed me from the first step to the last. Peace was no longer something I sought. It was who I was. It was who we all are.